You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino with Do Facts Matter? And of course, we know in this time and age, facts don't seem to make much difference at all. And I always point out some of the nonsense that's being spouted about masks and COVID-19, and from Fauci, who seems to change his view almost daily about what you should or shouldn't do. But at least the CDC has finally partially relieved this mask mandate. I mean, the worst advice ever given, of course, was shelter in place. Indoors is the worst place. But after a little, had to comment on that because of what's going on. But right now, I want to introduce my guest. I have a guest today, is Elleis Washington. And Elleis Washington graduated from John Marshall Law School in 1994. He is an essayist and author, and we're going to talk about one of his books and some of his views. I was telling Elleis at lunch today that I had remembered his book, and I'd used his book over the years, called Devil is in the Details, and if it was written in 1999, but it reads like a prophecy about what's going on today. Elleis, tell us a little bit about yourself before I ask you your first question.
Thank you, Professor D'Agostino. I'm honored to be on this radio program, America's Web Radio. Well, just a brief summary of who I am. I was born in Detroit in the early 60s, and from my earliest memory, I've been kind of an iconoclast and just kind of went against the grain. And so I think it probably had something to do with my mom taking me to the library at a really early age and learning to read at the library and kind of bypassing the public school system, so to speak. So I graduated from high school in the late 70s, Cass Technical High in Detroit, went to DePaul University and graduated from there with a degree in education and a minor in history in 1983. From there, I taught in public schools for about 2 years. Both my parents are teachers. I have education in my background going back to probably the early 30s in my family, so education is kind of in my DNA. So after 2 years in the public school, I went to University of Michigan, where I was majoring in music at that time. I played French horn, I'm a classical trained musician. I was initially trying to become an orchestral musician, and did that for a while actually. After I graduated about a year and a half, got my master's degree in music at University of Michigan, and went on to play assistant principal, French horn in an orchestra in Mexico, Toluca, which is the capital of the state of Mexico. Did that for about a year. Came back, went to Harvard graduate school studying, was working on a PhD in history there, and later found out that I was going to school with one future president named Barack Obama. And I actually, ironically, during that time, after my first year there, I took some classes in the law in 1989 at the behest of my best friend there. And one of my teachers was Professor Randall Kennedy, who's a well-known civil rights scholar and very prolific author.
Of course, Randall Kennedy wasn't he involved with the critical studies movement?
Yes, exactly. He was probably one of the founding members of that big critical studies.
I remember the story about Randall Kennedy was complaining that the students at Harvard, when they decided who their favorite teachers were, would invariably choose these abusive, conservative professors,
right? And
rather than him, who pandered not only to the students but to everybody else, and he couldn't understand why his pandering didn't make him more popular.
Exactly. Yeah, he was one of those professors. I mean, just looking back at him, I mean, and I had to get special because I was a graduate student in history. I don't know how it is now, but back in those days, in order to kind of get interested in the law, I want to take a couple of classes. I had to get special permission from the dean, who I believe then was a guy named Clark. And he gave me permission after talking to me. And my first class was with Randall Kennedy, but I didn't really want to study with him. There was another professor there that was much more beloved of the students. This name might ring a bell. What's his name? He passed away now. He taught a class called Racism. God, doggone it. I can't think of his name right now, but it'll come back to me, and I know this name will ring a bell with you. But he was kind of like always playing second fiddle to this guy, and this guy was really a legend. He had a lot of his classes were always packed, and so that's why I couldn't take his class. So I kind of took Randall Kennedy's class as a consolation prize. But then, just finishing my little bio summary, after that year, I took about a year studying, trying to get into law school, and I finally got into a school in Michigan, Thomas Cooley, and then after a year there I transferred to John Marshall in 1992, where after 2 years there I got my degree in 94. So since during that time, last 30 years or so, I've been writing books and essays on various aspects of history, law, legal philosophy, political theory, you name it.
And all this brings me to the first question, because one of the books that I have read, and I need to reread it again,
Okay.
but I've used it. It's called a book, 1999, The Devil is in the Details, Essays on Law, Race, Politics, and Religion. And this is a very interesting book because not only are the essays thought-provoking, but they're prophetic. There's some things you wrote in here that I said, well, my goodness, this has come true, unfortunately. And you really, I don't know how successful the book was in sales, but it should be successful. It really a book I've quoted from over the years as a professor. And one of the things, most interesting essays that in this book is Black or Black, capital B or small b. And what is that all about?
Well, thank you, Professor D'Agostino, for asking me that question. It brings up an interesting story. I'm not sure if I ever told you this, but I hope you like it and your readership will find it unique. One of the words that I kind of use to define myself, going back to my earliest years as a child of 3, 4, 5 years old, is I'm an iconoclast. What that word, you don't hear that word too much. An iconoclast literally means somebody who hates icons. In other words, you're an unconventional thinker. You're a critical thinker. You hate going along with convention, with swimming downstream with the crowd. You like to swim against upstream. So that's how I've always been. And one of the things I did when I was at Harvard and wanted to get some grounding in the law, I said, well, summer's coming up. Maybe I can get an internship with somebody. And I went back to my old alma mater, University of Michigan, during winter, spring, Christmas break. And I looked on the job board, and there was 2 jobs available. One was to do legal research with a law professor at University of Michigan. Another one was for the law review. Well, I didn't know about the law review. Don't know what the protocol is. I applied to both. Didn't get the first one, but I did, ironically, get the second one. Literally, I got on the law review off the streets. Well, from that, I started looking at law reviews, doing research on law reviews that were going to be published by different scholars around the country. And I learned every time they were speaking about blacks or my people, I'm black, it was always in the lower case, and that bothered me. And so I decided to, during that time on the law review, write my own kind of draft of why I thought this was wrong, and did research that it wasn't always this way. Earlier scholarship had it capitalized, and even a scholar like W.E.B. Du Bois talked about this, over 100 years ago in his scholarship. And so this was a issue that seemed like it was a minor point, but if you, in my view, marginalize people, a whole race of people, by giving them a lowercase, and if you're speaking about like Hispanics, that's going to be capital H. You talk about Asians, that's generally a capital A. And but then other people will say, well, whites is not capitalized. Well, that's true, but you all are the race that controls everything, and so whether you're capitalized or not, doesn't matter, you're still running everything. But blacks, we've been historically marginalized race, and while you put us in a lowercase, it just seems to just stick the knife in our back, even as we go into the 21st century. And so that's why I wrote
Of
that
course,
article.
Ellis, nowadays, as far as running things, if you came from Mars, you would think the homosexual community is running everything.
There you
nowadays.
go. Right.
LBQ, whatever it is.
Yeah, see, that didn't exist back then.
No, right.
So,
Exactly. So,
yes.
yeah, back then, no question, the Anglo-Saxon white community was running everything until they ceded ground in the 60s out of guilt for the way they treated blacks. And so I think that's the real reason that they kind of withdrew from the intellectual leadership of this country. And then the fight came between the Catholics, the rise of the Catholics,
yes.
Intellectuals, and more importantly, the rise of the Jewish intellectuals, who unfortunately in those days were almost all left-wingers.
Yes.
And now we have people like David Horowitz and Dennis Prager and Mark Levin, solid people, but Jewish leadership then was primarily way left.
Exactly.
And that was for historic reasons. After all,
Yes.
they were the sons and daughters of Jews who had come from Russia, and they were persecuted, and some of the persecution was by the Russian Orthodox Church, so they blamed it on Christians in general. But anyway, let's get back to this whole reason, and I think it's an interesting reason why you're for capital B for blacks. And you're right. I didn't think about it until I read your essay about Asians and Hispanics. Nowadays, Hispanics is always
Yes.
a capital H.
Yes, exactly. And it goes back to legitimacy, and that's why the subtitle of my article is Black lowercase b or Black capital B, a plea for legitimacy and legal scholarship. And I took my arguments all the way up to the Supreme Court, actually, and I got a response. I mean, not as a court case, but in letters and sending the manuscript and then later the book to various members of the Supreme Court. Like I say, I'm an iconoclast. I'm kind of crazy. How can a ghetto boy from Detroit thinking, you can go to the Supreme Court and get any kind of answer or anything? But I did, and I got an answer. And one of the judges, Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman to sit on the Supreme Court, she had one of her, clerks send me a rather detailed letter. I got to find that letter. I'm sure I have it in my file somewhere, arguing that, well, white's not capitalized, and the Supreme Court, we have our rule book, and we don't capitalize it. And so I was a little bit disheartened. And then she didn't really address any of my substantive arguments. And I've learned from law, from people like my mentor here, Professor D'Agostino, was when somebody doesn't address any of your points or marginalize them or sets up, straw man or red herrings, those are telltale signs that they don't really have a good argument, And so I didn't take it as a big loss. I was actually kind of honored that she replied. I'm sorry that I couldn't get the Supreme Court to change it, but it's kind of it gave me kind of a Pyrrhic victory.
Well, I think we see that nowadays when the response to conservatives or the response to argument from libertarians or conservatives is almost always met with ad hominem attacks.
Exactly.
Why address the issues when you can attack someone personally? And of course, that's Saul Alinsky was very much in favor of that. Right. The idea of you gain power by humiliating or making fun of your opponents. Don't address the issues. I mean, Saul Alinsky made it very plain not to address the issues.
Yes.
And you've read Saul Alinsky, and you know.
Of course.
And so let's get on with some other interesting things you have in the book. You spent a lot of time, and we'll do this after the break, on positivism versus natural law. And we're now up against a break, and we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Rocky Blair, former four-time Super Bowl champion with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Vietnam veteran. As a board member, I'd like to talk to you about Warriors to Citizen, a nonprofit organization that helps American heroes, soldiers, police, fire, EMT, and their families recover from the psychological harm caused by career-induced stress. Over the last 20 years, broken relationships have been a major causal factor for the highest documented divorce rate and resulting suicides in this population. This program, From Warriors to Citizen, is delivered free to families by professionals, all whom served in uniform and understand the needs to be addressed. I ask for your support, so please go to our website, warriorstocitizen.org, and find out how you can help, either by making a donation or sharing this information with an American hero. that you may know. And thank you.
Hello, my name is Rick White, and I'm the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I want to encourage all Georgia veterans to consider being nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And if you are a Georgia veteran, and the definition of a Georgia veteran is either you were born in the state of Georgia, or you've lived here 10 years, or you were raised your right hand, joined the military in this state, you are considered a Georgia veteran. For further information, go to www.gmbhof.org, or you can contact me at 678-427-0915. We'd love to have your nomination for the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. Thank you so much.
If you live to serve and want to make an even bigger difference, consider joining the U.S. Army. With training in fields like medical care, linguistics, and engineering, an Army career can amplify your efforts with humanitarian opportunities all over the world. Plus, you'll receive competitive pay and incredible benefits, so you'll be taken care of, too. Learn more at GoArmy.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino back with Do Facts Matter, and my guest, Elleis Washington, the author of an interesting book. It's a short book, but it's a very interesting book called The Devil is in the Details. It was published in 1999, and it's essays on law, race, politics, and religion. And despite the fact that it was published 22 years ago, it has quite a bit of relevance for today. All right, Elleis, we ended the first segment of the show, and I raised the issue of law, natural law, positive law. And of course, that brings up, of course, Oliver Wendell Holmes and a few others. Explain what positive law is as opposed to natural law.
Sure. Positive law, just briefly, is the law of the state. It means the law of man, the law of might makes right, the law basically of the jungle. It's Darwinist in conception and in application, as opposed to what natural law is, which is integration of church and state. Positive law is a separation of church and state. So natural law is combining our founding fathers' veneration and admiration of the Bible, of Christianity, and applying those eternal precepts encapsulated in the Ten Commandments into their republic.
Which brings up another book that you wrote about morality and inseparability of morality and law.
Yes, that was my third book, I believe. I think that was published in 2001. Yes, that was probably my most academic work. And I wanted to have a title that just said basically what natural law is. And it is the inseparability of law and morality. And so we see a lot of problems today, Professor D'Agostino, as we are in the 21st century here in year 2021. Problems that we're having, the upheaval, the race against race, philosophies against philosophy, Democrats against Republicans. We've always had that, but it seems to be reaching a critical mass right now. And I think a lot of that, Professor, is due to the fact that we've forgotten the original intent of the constitutional framers, which was natural law. And Jefferson talked about it, where he said the law of nature and of nature's God in the Declaration of Independence. That's natural law.
And but of course the left tells us that was not carried over to the Constitution. And in fact, the matter is, if you look at the Constitution as originally conceived of, it was really a structural document. It was really a procedural document. And I think the assumption was that the country would be based on the natural law Declaration of Independence, and the assumption was essentially underlined by Christianity.
Yes.
And hadn't quite worked out that way, at least recently.
It didn't. And where did the happen? If you go back, what's his name? I speak about him in the book. If maybe I can just take it real quick here.
Sure.
There was let me just look in the in chapter 7, it's called I do a essay review of a book by David Barton. He's a very good scholar. If you get a chance to read, I think he has a website called wallbuilders.com, I believe, David Barton. And so the book that I did was it's called The Myth of Separation. I'm sorry, what is the name of it? he changed the name of that book. Original Intent is the name that he called it, but here was an earlier version of it that he called it something else. But the name of the book that I do the review of by David Barton is called Original Intent, and in that book, he quotes more than any other author that I've read. There's hundreds and hundreds of quotes by the founding fathers, from George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, not the founding father, George Washington, Franklin, Madison, Jefferson, even people like Samuel Adams, all the way down, later to the Civil War era, with Abraham Lincoln and beyond. The constant leitmotif, so to speak, of keeping legality and morality forever inseparable. And he said, and John Adams had a famous quote, and I'm just paraphrasing it. He said that our Constitution was written for a moral and religious people, and it is wholly untenable for the ruling of any other type of people. In other words, the Constitution it's hot-wired as part of our moral DNA, and part of that means that Christianity has to be integrated with the laws of the land. And if you try to separate Christianity from the laws of the land, or if you try to separate legality from morality, as the progressives and the left have been successfully doing for the past 200 plus years, then you're going to have what we have now. You have chaos, you have societal upheaval, you have the rise of other atheistic, paganistic philosophies like Darwinism, like Alinsky, like the Hegelian dialectic based on, you have a problem, a reaction, and solution, where they use that formula to redefine what reality is.
Yeah, I don't forget, for listeners, that Christianity, of course, is based on the two pillars, Greek philosophy and the Jewish faith. And that's why we have so many of our current defenders of Western civilization are Jewish. They understand the basis of where we are now. They understand the importance of morality and law together. I'm Dennis Prager, David Horowitz, these are Mark Levin. These are leading thinkers in terms of trying to bring the country to its senses. But let me ask you this question. Washington was a slaveholder. Jefferson was a slaveholder. And very often the left says, they're tearing down statutes of Washington and Jefferson because they were slaveholders. And of course, the founder of the modern Democratic Party, Andrew Jackson, was not only a slaveholder, he's a slave trader. He actually traded slaves as commodities before he became president, made a lot of money flipping slaves instead of flipping real estate. And he was, and not only that, he was a rather cruel slaveholder. But be it as it may, go back to the founders. Let's go back to Washington and Jefferson. They were slaveholders. So what do you mean that natural law? What do you mean that they believe in that stuff?
Right.
What's your answer?
Well, I'm not here as an apologist for slavery. Slavery was bad. Let me say that up front. It was immoral, and it needs to be, even though it exists right now, and you don't hear a lot of complaints from the left now about the, 20-plus countries, most of them in Africa, Northern Africa, that are still active.
Well, the rumors Mauritania has actually slave markets.
Exactly. Also Libya, since the fall of Gaddafi, who was very anti-slave, ironically.
Yes. Well, Hillary got rid of him. Right. So that's to stabilize Libya. So everything since he left. He was a dictator. He was nasty, but.
He wasn't
better
PC.
In Libya now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely not with the slave markets that meet regularly, and people have caught those on film, where they have the slave block like we had here in America back, before the Civil War. So, to answer your question, Professor D'Agostino, let me just quantify it, because I know the left, in their moral righteousness, they always try to say, to basically throw the baby out with the bathwater. Jefferson had slaves, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Andrew Jackson, etc. So thus, and so their reasoning goes, and this is all Hegelian dialectic, which is all, irrational BS philosophy, but this is their thinking that if they're the founding fathers were slaveholders, then that means the documents that they used to found this country are somehow illegitimate, which is throwing the baby out with the bathwater kind of philosophy. So I dismiss that kind of thinking. So let me go, before I address the more substantive points of your question, let me just say this. If you're going to denigrate Andrew Jackson, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and all the other slaveholders from that period, even going back to when the Pilgrims arrived in 1619, that had, I think, 19 slaves, the first slaves back then, you have to, and that was a little over 400 years ago, you have to denigrate the original slaveholders, which were rival African tribes that sold out their own people that they captured in little internecine battles that they had. Yes, Africans, long before the white man came, long before anybody came, they were fighting each other and enslaving each other.
Well, the Roman Empire was a slave empire.
Thank you.
I mean, the answer is slavery has been with us forever, and it took the Brits to end the slave trade on the high seas. What was that, in 1808
1809, I believe.
1809?
Yes.
So it was, and they did it for religious reasons.
Yes, they did.
And
Wilberforce.
Right. And then I was 1838, where the Brits forbid slavery in all their overseas
yes, I think it was, I don't know why I'm thinking 1832, but somewhere in the 1830s.
Okay,
yeah.
Whatever it was.
Yes.
But, and by the way, just as a side, I don't have any problem denigrating Andrew Jackson.
Yes.
He was not a founder, and he was a vicious slaveholder and slave trader, and a lot of other things he did. He double-crossed the Cherokee Indians, for example.
Yes, and the Trail of Tears.
Right. Well, they were his allies, and he double-crossed them.
He did, and that was wrong. But one thing he did do was he got rid of that second Bank of America. Thank goodness. He was against the Rothschild, who I call the Rothschild-Khazarian Mafia, debt slavery system that they have successfully enslaved virtually every nation on earth, nearly 200 nations over the last 250 years.
It's back in operation.
Yes.
Well, anyway, get back to your point, because it's an interesting point to make.
Thank you. So you have the Africans that were enslaving each other for centuries, okay? And then who came next? Probably shortly after the founding of their religion in the 7th century, the nice Muslims. They had a slave trade that lasted for centuries, even to this day. They're the ones that are having slave centers in Libya, in Mauritania, in Chad, in northern Nigeria, on and on and on. You can go to Google and look up nations that still have slavery. You don't hear a peep from the left, the progressive, the woke Antifa, the woke BLM. You don't hear a peep because it doesn't fit with their agenda. They only want to denigrate Christian white males, and they want to hold them to this special standard, and they ignore the rest of history, or rewrite history. As Marx says, the first battlefield is the rewriting of history, and that's what we let these leftist psychopaths do for years, giving them control of the academy and all of our institutions. But now things are slowly changing. People are getting woke. People are doing their own research, Professor, thank goodness, and a lot of people that have been just reflexively leftist or liberal are rethinking it and doing their own research, and they are coming to vastly different conclusions than the propaganda they've been fed with all of their lives.
Well, of course, you use woke in the original sense of black community, because that really comes from black community. As awareness.
Exactly. I'm using a positive sense.
Right. And of course, nowadays they use it in quite a different sense.
Yes, sir.
In terms of being woke.
Yes.
And I've talked on this show a number of times about how progressivism is a religion. I think the religion may be wokeism, which includes progressivism, among other things, because it's Marxist at its core. But let's get back. By the way, you did, in passing, refer to 1619. There's some scholarship that says they weren't slaves. They were indentured servants. And they were, in fact, there's some indication that they were freed within a couple of years after they served as indentured servants. So there's a new book out by, it's called 1620, and it's by a professor. I should have looked up before I came in here. But which is very interesting. So it puts the lie to the New York Times
1619 project.
1619 projects, which, by the way, a lot of scholars have really taken apart. And you'll notice on the 1619 project, there are virtually no footnotes.
Yes.
So there's no real research there.
And probably no conservative scholars.
No, of course not. And the 1620 book that just came out, and I've ordered it, by the way, is, and I'll read it, and after I've read it, we'll have a show on that, is full of footnotes. It's very well documented about what he says and doesn't say. So this is all baloney about this. This country is founded on slavery. That's nonsense. Other thing is, as far as African slaves are concerned, 90+% of them went to the Caribbean and Central and South America.
Yes.
The U.S. got about, 6 or 7%?
Very low percentage.
And that doesn't make it right. But the
Yes.
point is, it puts it in context.
Yes.
We weren't alone, that's for
Yes.
sure. And we fought a war to get rid of it, and
Yes.
that war cost a lot of lives, white and black lives.
Yes.
So it ended there. And I'm kind of the philosophy and the opinion, look, you honor people for their positive contributions, and you recognize that most people have negative contributions too. So Washington, by the way, Washington freed his slave at his death.
Thank you. I was glad that you mentioned that. You're reading my mind. He died, I believe, in 1798, and he wrote in his will that his slaves would be free 1 year after his death. His wife actually had twice as many slaves. She came from a very wealthy family. She didn't want to let his slaves go. Obviously, he must have told his slaves about their imminent freedom, and they literally threatened her life. Then she relented and let the slaves go. But you never hear that. Also, Jefferson later let his slaves go that he had with the black woman, Sally Heming. I think he had 4 children by her, and he freed them.
We're up against a break. We'll be right back with continue that thought.
Hey folks, this is Victor with the On Point with Victor show. Make sure you listen every Tuesday 1 to 2, only right here on America's Web Radio, the On Point with Victor show. Remember folks, I'm not angry, I'm just right. And you can find out why every Tuesday from 1 to 2, the On Point with Victor show, only right here on America's Web Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, join me, Roger B., every Tuesday at 1400 hours right here on America's Web Radio for the Locked and Loaded Show. We will talk about guns, weapons, ammo, gun accessories, prepping, and so much more. So be sure to join us every Tuesday at 1400 or 2 p.m. for Locked and Loaded on America's Web Radio.
Hello, my name is Rick White, and I'm the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I want to encourage all Georgia veterans to consider being nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And if you are a Georgia veteran, and the definition of a Georgia veteran is either you were born in the state of Georgia, or you've lived there for 10 years, or you were raised your right hand and joined the military in this state, you are considered a Georgia veteran. For further information, go to www.gmvhof.org, or you can contact me at 678-427-0915. We'd love to have your nomination for the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. Thank you so much.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino, back with Two Facts Matter, and my guest, Elleis Washington. And we're talking about people should be honored for the contributions they make, and I'm not saying we should overlook their faults, but we should understand them in context. And Jefferson did much for this country in terms of natural law, in terms of setting the groundwork for the future equality or the acceptance of equality. And Washington, of course, was also anti-slavery, and he freed his slaves. And a lot of the founders, let's talk about that, because we also get all this stuff about the 3/5 issue. Right? Oh, well, the Constitution's a slave document. Black folks are only worth 3/5 of what white folks are worth. Tell us about what that was really about.
Yes, it was about representation, because to get representatives sent to Congress, each state had 2 senators, but in order to be more representative, it was based on population, and so that would favor the congressional candidates or the congressional members of Congress would favor bigger states. So, states like New York would be Pennsylvania would be more favored. They have bigger populations than, say, like Rhode Island or Delaware.
But if all the blacks were counted, all the slaves were counted as one, then 3/5, the South would get more members of the House of Representatives. So they were in favor, the southern states, of full count.
Right.
And it's the northern states that didn't want to count them because they didn't want the South to control the House of Representatives.
But the way the Marxist revisionist historian have written history, as to say, you see, this is the 3/5 clause. The white man, the whites, Americans only saw blacks as 3/5 of a person because they just thought of them as inhuman and secondary status, and it was just the opposite. It was to dilute Southern pro-slavery representation in Congress.
Yes, and I think people. It's amazing how ignorant people are of history. I don't think they learn much of anything in college anymore. I kind of half joke with some of my students, law students, say that what did you males, what did you men major in college? My impression is you majored in football, drinking beer, and chasing women, and it always gets a kind of a smile because it's true. They didn't do anything in college for 4 years. And how about you women? Well, one of the things you majored in is things you never thought about doing before, good and bad. And going to football games to make your boyfriends happy. And then sizing them up for future possible mates. But what's going on in colleges, obviously from what I see of my students in law school, is not education.
No, it's indoctrination, and it reminds me, Professor, of a meme that I recently posted on my Facebook page. By the way, if you want to follow me on social media, I have a pretty active Facebook page. Just search my name, Elleis Washington, and I'm the one. There's several Elleis Washingtons, but I'm the one that has the big American flag behind me. And please friend me on Facebook. I would love to have you. And I also have a blog, Elleis Washington Report. And Professor, I'm glad to say that the blog has been online now, I think, since 2010, 2009, and we're approaching 20 million views. So just one point that I wanted to say about your point, Professor, about how people just don't think. This meme that I posted says, if you let people denigrate or take away your freedom of speech, you did not get an education, you got an indoctrination. And I thought that was right on the point, and it kind of ties in with what you were just saying.
Well, also it ties in with the fact that just because someone is credentialed doesn't mean they're educated.
Absolutely.
And a good example of that is a very intelligent president we had named Barack Obama, who was very well credentialed, but I don't think you can say he was educated.
Not at all. And a lot of people, when I tell them, I went to school with him, they ask me, do I remember him? I just have a vague shadow of him because, of course, he wasn't who he is now. He was just a guy. I think I remember playing intramural basketball. I had some friends in the law school. One of my best friends is actually a guy, Leon Bichet, who actually convinced me to go to law school, which in retrospect was a big mistake. But anyway, that said, I think I remember Obama, playing him, strategizing against him. He was, even back then, he was one-dimensional. He was a three-point shooter all the time. I was kind of a Charles Oakley kind of guy that was on the block down low. So we was playing a game against them, and one of the things that we did to beat them, to move on in the championship game, was we wanted to take away what he liked to do. So he just liked to sit back. He didn't want to get down and dirty, mix it up, pounding each other down low. He wanted to just stay out there like a little princess shooting threes all day, which he was actually pretty good at. So what we did was we just kept a guy, say, don't check nobody, you just stay right here on the three-point line, and when he comes up, just get in his face, and we want to force him to get off that three-point line where I was waiting for him. And I don't have to tell you how that game turned out.
Well, that's an interesting story. Of course, people who went for him when he supposedly went to Columbia.
Right. Nobody saw him.
No one saw him.
Yes.
So you kind of wondered how he got the degree from Columbia. Maybe since the records, of course, are sealed and you can't access those records.
Yes.
Who knows? But people say they never saw him at Columbia.
Exactly. And also, who financed his Harvard education? Word is coming out that was one of the Saudi princes, a big radical that has since been, had his chain yanked when the first trip that Trump took was to Saudi Arabia, and that wasn't because he was a big fan. He was doing some things to deconstruct the deep state, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do. Let's get back to some of the things that you said. I want to get back to this idea of the Supreme Court and how they look at cases, and this natural law tradition, which is pretty well dying. Basically, the Constitution, except for certain areas of the Constitution, are dead letter. The non-delegation clause seems to be a dead letter. The contracts clause is really a dead letter. The Commerce Clause has been stretched all out of proportion.
Yes.
And so there are a lot of things that, and the Supreme Court finding constitutional rights to things like abortion.
The penumbra, the shadows.
Yes, right, the penumbras and shadows. So what are they using as an interpretive measure for the Supreme Court? What are they using?
Well, that's a very good question, and I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but there is some light at the end of the tunnel. This may sound cynical to a lot of people that have faith in the law and in the Supreme Court, but I think that bubble has been broke with Roberts and how he dropped the ball with Trump trying to get justice for all of the vote fraud that was going on with the Dominion and Smartmatic voter machines. Now with the recount in Arizona, that's starting to change. But to answer your question directly, it's basically the left, the Marxists, the Democrats, whatever you want to call them, deep state. They have the law of the jungle. They're Darwinists, they're evolution atheists, they're eugenicists, they're Saul Alinsky. They believe in Machiavelli, the end justifies the mean, okay? And so whatever the judge think is law, whatever conclusion he wants to reach, he will wrap the law mumbo jumbo and presto changeo to come to the conclusion he wants to reach. The Constitution be damned. That's basically what constitutional law is. That's what they learned from their patron saint, Oliver Wendell Holmes, 100 years ago. And I did an essay that did a 100-year survey of him, of his famous Harvard law.
Where does that essay appear? Because I read it and it was a really wonderful essay.
Yes, it was. Thank you. It's published in the Faulkner Law Review in 1918, and it's basically, if I can see if I can remember the title, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. 1917 to 2017, 100 years of unnatural law of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, and it's published in the Faulkner Law Review.
Yeah, I urge it on people. You can pick it up on the internet.
Yes. Yeah, just put that title in. And I also have a PDF version of it on Elleis Washington Report. You just go to my blog and search under Oliver Wendell Holmes, and it'll pop right up.
Oh, good. And I urge people to take a look at that because it was really a great article. And, of course, being a law professor, I have some of my colleagues are great admirers of Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Of course.
So I've done battle with him, in polite debate. It's interesting. One of the professors who is very left wing in his voting, but he's very knowledgeable, and he doesn't connect his knowledge with his vote. It's really interesting. We agree on so many things, and then he goes and votes ultra left-wing candidate.
Right.
I don't understand it. I don't understand what he's doing. Anyway, we're up against a break. After break, we'll be right back.
If you live to serve and want to make an even bigger difference, consider joining the U.S. Army. With training in fields like medical care, linguistics, and engineering, an Army career can amplify your efforts with humanitarian opportunities all over the world. Plus, you'll receive competitive pay and incredible benefits, so you'll be taken care of, too. Learn more at GoArmy.com.
Hi, this is Rocky Blair, former four-time Super Bowl champion with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Vietnam veteran. As a board member, I'd like to talk to you about Warriors to Citizen, a nonprofit organization that helps American heroes, soldiers, police, fire, EMT, and their families recover from the psychological harm caused by career-induced stress. Over the last 20 years, broken relationships have been a major causal factor for the highest documented divorce rate and resulting suicides in this population. This program, From Warriors to Citizen, is delivered free to families by professionals, all whom served in uniform and understand the needs to be addressed. I ask for your support, so please go to our website, warriorstocitizen.org, and find out how you can help, either by making a donation or sharing this information with an American hero that you may know. And thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, join me, Roger B., every Tuesday at 1400 hours right here on America's Web Radio for the Locked and Loaded Show. We will talk about guns, weapons, ammo, gun accessories, prepping, and so much more. So be sure to join us every Tuesday at 1400 or 2 p.m. for Locked and Loaded on America's Web Radio.
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
This is Professor Robert D'Agostino back with Two Facts Matter and my guest Elleis Washington, talking about some of his positions and his essays in The Devil is in the Details, and a book that, if it's still available, I urge, even though it's 20 years old, it's 21 years old, 22 years old.
Yeah, I checked the other day. It's posted still on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Also, my other 10 books are on there, too, and also on my website. You can find links to my books, all 11 of them.
I didn't realize you wrote 11 books.
Yeah,
I've
over 30 law review articles.
Well, I've read some of your law review articles, and of course, I have two of your books, The Inseparability of Morality and Law, and The Devil's in the Details. But somehow I missed some of the other ones. You did send me a third one, which I didn't read.
Okay, that's okay.
I gotta go get.
I just wanted to let you know I wasn't just being a bum for the last 30 years. Even though I couldn't get a law professorship, I've been busy trying to positively affect the marketplace of ideas, to borrow a phrase from our friend Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Well, there's no way, almost no way, that a conservative can get a job as a law professor.
It's almost impossible.
And my son, who's a really a scholar, first class, he's published well, including in the University of Virginia Law Review, and he's a really great professor. Students really rate him tremendously high, but he's a conservative, and he's got lots of strikes. He's white, he's a male, he's a conservative, and he's a Christian.
Wow, that's 4
Strike
strikes.
4.
Yeah.
And he's over 40, strike 5.
Wow.
That gives you 5 strikes.
Yeah.
And I tell him, I said, he wants to get another job as a professor. He was a professor at Savannah Law School, and he wants to get another job as a professor.
Yes.
And I said, yeah, maybe in South Korea.
Yes.
Try South Korea.
It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is right now. Unless we have a revolution in our government where we get these lefties out that have been basically running our lives for hundreds of years behind the scenes, secret societies and other things like that. We have to have a revolution in order to change it.
Now, you mean by revolution, you mean gunfire?
I hope it doesn't get to that. It might take that. We're seeing that now in places like Israel with Hamas bombing and. But that's, of course, the Biden administration is funding it. Right.
I mean, they gave $235 million to the Palestinians, whereupon the Palestinians proceeded to go ahead and send 1,500 rockets into Israel.
Yes.
And we're going to give how many billions to Iran so that we can fund their terrorist group?
Right.
And what does China do after Biden's elected? They told Australia that we're going to bomb Australia. We're going to send the long-range missiles to Australia. If Australia tries to help the United States defend Taiwan, that's also not only a warning to Australia, it's a warning to Taiwan. So the weakness of Biden is now pretty obvious to the whole world, and the strength of and by the way, the North Koreans are resuming missile tests. So the question is, nobody pays attention. No one takes Biden seriously. And we did when he was a senator from Delaware. I mean,
yes.
Come on. We used to call him the senator from Wilmington Trust.
Right.
And I used to one show I went through all the lies he's told, the plagiarism, the lies.
Sure.
Yeah, I marched with the civil rights people. No, he didn't. No one saw you if you marched. No one could find you on the line.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was arrested in South Africa trying to see Mandela. Well, no, Andrew Young was with you. He's the former mayor of Atlanta and well-known Democrat. He said he didn't recall that incident, and he had to backtrack on that one. I got endorsed by some union in Pennsylvania. No, they endorsed Trump. My wife was killed my first wife was killed in a drunk driver accident. Drunk truck driver. No, he wasn't drunk. Your wife jumped the stop sign. It doesn't make it better.
It goes on and on.
It goes on and on.
Yes.
And how about the plagiarism when he plagiarized the life of Neil Kinnock, who was running for Labor Prime Minister?
Took his speech
verbatim.
verbatim.
His entire speech verbatim and substituted his name for Neil's name. Had nothing much to do with his life, but it sounded wonderful.
By the way, he's a socialist in Britain.
Yeah, but anyway, he plagiarized the whole speech. And not only that, he was up for plagiarism when he was in law school.
Exactly.
And his defense in law school to the plagiarism charges, he was too stupid to know he was plagiarizing something.
Well, that's about the only thing he said. That's about the only thing he said truthfully.
That's true. That's true. And so I mean, and he's the president. Oh my goodness.
And then one other point, show his credentials about helping blacks. Well, when the second black was nominated to the Supreme Court, who has been my mentor for 35 plus years, Justice Clarence Thomas, I actually discovered him at reading in the law library at Harvard, and I came across his famous Howard Law Review article that is very excellent. It was written in 1987. If anybody wants to go back that far and read some of the early scholarship of Justice Thomas, is just pure natural law all the way. But anyway, who was on the Senate Judiciary Committee that was going to review the credentials of Clarence Thomas? None other than Joe Biden, who basically turned the whole thing into a circus, as Clarence Thomas rightly said in his famous defense. You can find that on YouTube, where he basically called it a high-tech lynching that was oversaw by none other than our current quote-unquote president, Joe Biden.
Okay, well, now we're up to the point is, what does the future hold? Where are we going from here? Is there a leader in the Republican Party or anywhere that could turn this thing around? Now, look, we all know that if the Democrats get H.R. 1 passed, that'll institutionalize fraud in the voting and institutionalize things like mail-in ballots and vote harvesting, which are both prone to tremendous fraud, and also get people who are totally ignorant, voting the way people tell them to vote. And so we know H.R. 1 will institutionalize and it'll be over. There's no way that the Republicans, for example, would ever take over the House, the Senate, or the presidency if that's passed. So the entire future of the country depends on Joe Manchin in West Virginia and Sinema in Arizona if they hold firm. But we'll see if they will or won't. So let's assume that's not passed. If it's passed, it's over. In terms of there's no way a conservative, no way a Republican can get in, assuming the Republicans do anything right. Now, I'm not an admirer of the Republican Party. I'm an admirer of certain Republican politicians, Josh Hawley of Missouri, Tom Cotton of Arkansas, Tim Scott of South Carolina, Ted Cruz of Texas. These are very courageous people, and they stand for the right things. Rand Paul in Kentucky. But let's assume H.R. 1 isn't passed. What's our future?
Well, I'm gonna go on a line. I hope that what I'm about to say doesn't nullify, whatever the public's view is of me as being a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. But I'm gonna pull out something that maybe some of you might have heard in the ether Professor D'Agostino and I talked about it just briefly before coming here, but I'm a big supporter of the Q movement. QAnon. Q is the military intelligence, a small cabal of people that are loyal to Trump. And I believe that what we're watching, with to answer your question more directly, with the people, what we're going through, the machinations, our military, that's basically turned D.C. into a military state. Buckingham Palace is boarded up. The Vatican is essentially boarded up. What is it about these particularly three cities? Well, number one, most people don't realize this. Washington, D.C., the City of London, and the Vatican are all independent sovereign states that are separate from the countries that they're in. So Washington, D.C. is a totally separate country from America. Same with the Vatican, same with the City of London. Well, when did that happen here in D.C.? In Washington, D.C. happened. A treasonous deal happened in 1871 called the D.C. Act. You can look this up on Wikipedia. D.C. Act of 1871, where they took the original republic of 1776 and turned the United States into all capital letters and made it a corporation. And that kind of makes sense with why we've been under this kind of like matrix existence for the last 150 years until Trump came. That's why they fought Trump so hard. He returned he dissolved the corporation. Being a businessman, he understood about corporation and what they meant. He dissolved that. That's why you see the military in D.C. That's why everything's fenced off. That's why it's on lockdown. That's why you're seeing these other nations being deconstructed before your very eyes. The Vatican, Buckingham Palace. That's why when he went to see the Queen offered Trump to go before her. You only do that if you're a superior person in stature to go before the Queen. The Queen always goes first. Why would she let Trump go first? Because she knew Trump had deconstructed Britain and all of their machinations, keeping us basically in debt slavery under the Rothschild-Khazarian Mafia, what I call them, for the last 150 years. But Trump returned that shortly before Biden became president. So that brings us to this question. What is Biden president of? In my view, and I wrote an article on this, he's president of nothing. Well, what are we seeing then with him and Kamala walking around? Well, what are they doing? They're walking around, they're going in the planes. Sometimes Kamala Harris goes up the stairs to a plane and they caught it and there's no plane there. Biden is in Oval Office, but is it really the Oval Office? Because we look at D.C., the lights go out at 11 every night or 10 o'clock. Nobody's going in and out. We never see him going in to the White House. The White House that we see him at is a stage. It's Castle Rock. It's in Culver City, California, or it's here in Atlanta.
No, are you suggesting that Biden is not in Washington?
No, he's not. I'm saying further, he's not president. He's president of nothing.
Well, we all understand that he doesn't make the decisions, but I think it's a far-fetched to think that he's not actually in Washington. He's surrounded by people who are actually making the decisions and telling him what to do. And of course, the point that you're making is that we have a really very influential and financially powerful cabal who really has more influence on the world than people think. With that, the show is over, and I want to follow up on another show with you on some of these thoughts.
Yes.
And thank you for listening.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
If you live to serve and want to make an even bigger difference, consider joining the U.S. Army. With training in fields like medical care, linguistics, and engineering, an Army career can amplify your efforts with humanitarian opportunities all over the world. Plus, you'll receive competitive pay and incredible benefits, so you'll be taken care of, too. Learn more at GoArmy.com.
Hi, this is Rocky Blair, former four-time Super Bowl champion with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Vietnam veteran. As a board member, I'd like to talk to you about Warriors to Citizen, a nonprofit organization that helps American heroes, soldiers, police, fire, EMT, and their families recover from the psychological harm caused by career-induced stress. Over the last 20 years, broken relationships have been a major causal factor for the highest documented divorce rate and resulting suicides in this population. This program, From Warriors to Citizen, is delivered free to families by professionals, all whom served in uniform and understand the needs to be addressed. I ask for your support, so please go to our website, warriorstocitizen.org, and find out how you can help, either by making a donation or sharing this information with an American hero that you may know. And thank you.
Hello, my name is Rick White, and I'm the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I want to encourage all Georgia veterans to consider being nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And if you are a Georgia veteran, and the definition of a Georgia veteran is either you were born in the state of Georgia, or you've lived here 10 years, or you were raised your right hand, joined the military in this state, you are considered a Georgia veteran. For further information, go to www.gmvhof.org, or you can contact me at 678-427-0915. We'd love to have your nomination for the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. Thank you so much.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Colonel Retired Rick White, the United States Army veteran, and I'm the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I would like to encourage all Georgia veterans to consider being nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. If you are a Georgia...
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back into the Doctor's Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Hal Schurz. Each week, myself, alternating weeks with my co-host, Dr. Scott Barber, come to you and bring you the information that doctors are speaking about in doctors' lounges all across the country. The show is brought to you by the Docs for Patient Care Foundation, which is the only physician-led healthcare think tank in the country. Go to our website, www.d4pcfoundation.org. That's d4pcfoundation.org, and contribute generously so that we can do this show and continue to do the work that we do all around the country, trying to influence the behaviors of people who are responsible for making laws that affect each and every one of you. The Docs for Patient Care Foundation fights for the physician-patient relationship and for health care freedom all across the country. So please support the work that we are doing. Today I have a very interesting show that I am excited to be able to be part of. We've got a special guest which I'm going to introduce. We're going to talk today about mental health problems caused by COVID in children, or said another way, COVID-related mental health problems affecting children. And to help with this discussion today, my guest is Dr. Roy Benarock, a friend of mine. He is a Miami native, a Tulane graduate of Emory Medical School, and a trainee in residency at Emory. He joined a large pediatric practice, Pediatric Physicians, PC, in 1998, which is a Roswell, Georgia pediatric practice that's in the Atlanta area for those of you around the country. And he is also an author. He has written several books on parenting, including Solving Health and Behavioral Problems from Birth through Preschool, and also a guide to getting the best health care for your child. He's a pediatric expert for WebMD and has created online courses such as Medical School for Everyone and The Skeptic's Guide to Health, Medicine, and the Media, something that is very apropos in today's climate, skepticism about the media. He writes a blog called Pediatric Insider, which focuses on parenting and healthcare topics in children. And my involvement with Roy, beside him being a referring doctor to me for a long time, is working hand in hand with him in an effort that we put together quite a few years ago here in Atlanta called the Children's Care Network, which is the largest of its kind, cooperative, a clinically integrated healthcare network for children that has well over 1,000 doctors that are involved in it. And Roy serves as the chair of this group. I'm the vice chair, so we work together on these on this initiative and have done so for quite some time. So without any further ado, let me introduce Roy Benarock and invite him into the Doctor's Lounge. Good morning, Roy.
Good morning, Hal. Thank you very much for, wow, when I hear you go through all of that, it sounds like I've been so busy, doesn't it?
It sure does. You're an impressive guy.
But I think of myself as first and foremost a general pediatrician. Been doing it actually close to 25 years now, if you can believe that. And that's really my main job and my main love.
But you
all that other stuff.
But you're very good at taking care of children. You recognize the problems in children, and you are an excellent educator and help parents to understand how to best take care of their children, which in this climate that we are now in is more important than ever.
Well, thank you. I completely agree with you. You know, kids depend mostly on their parents. Of course, other things, communities and schools and nutrition, so many things are important. But really, parents have most of the responsibility, most of the load. They've got the biggest lift, and they're what helps most important in helping keep kids healthy and happy and safe.
And that's a great segue into what we need to talk about today, which is how children are being affected in this COVID environment. It's an issue that people like you and I have recognized for quite some time, and there are a number of factors that are occurring. Some are unavoidable, and others are man-made, but nonetheless, the effect on children is profound. And people like you and I have recognized this for some time, and it's only recently that it appears that the general public, the media, the woke crowd, if you will, are coming up to speed on this issue. There's been a couple of recent articles that we'll talk about a little bit later on in the show that have appeared in mainstream media, such as Time Magazine or U.S. News and World Reports, that are focusing on children's mental health issues, the mental health crisis in children. So, Roy, tell our listeners what effects COVID is having on mental illness in children.
Well, I think, the simplest part of this, which is what we were maybe too focused on for too long, are the physical effects. I mean, COVID, we know in general, the disease COVID is less likely to affect children than adults, less likely to have complications. So that's been known for a while, and that's been, unfortunately, what's kind of led the headlines, right, that kids don't have to worry about COVID and it's not a big deal for kids. And we sort of, the needs of kids were, I think, fair to say, a little bit of an afterthought. But what we've come to realize are more, I suppose, the indirect effects. We're not talking about the viral effects on the brain, which actually are serious, though rare. We're talking more about the way that the changing environment for children, the changing home environment, changing school environment, changing environment in the playgrounds has affected their overall mental health. And it really is profound in many ways, unfortunately.
So you mentioned about the virus itself, which is something that affects everybody, but children, they recover. They rarely require hospitalization, and even more rarely succumb to this disease as opposed to elderly patients. But the I guess silent issue is what it is doing to their mental health, and not being in school is a large part of this. Having to do home school and not necessarily having the resources to be able to succeed is another. Having parents who might have been laid off from work is yet another. The list goes on and on. So, what are some of the things that you see in your patients that that you're hearing about that are direct or indirect effects of this pandemic on children?
We're seeing this in a lot of different ways. There are certainly many families who are contacting us whose kids are showing just overt signs of mental illness symptoms, and we can go into that a little bit more, what sort of things you see when a child has things like depression or an anxiety disorder. And those are diagnoses that unfortunately we're having to make more commonly now. But there's also a very large group of kids who are just far more stressed than would be typical, that are disconnected from their friends, are moody, are doing poorly in school. They're lying. They're doing all sorts of things that appropriately cause concern for their parents. And some of them don't necessarily have a mental health diagnosis, but they're certainly struggling. And sometimes parents are bringing them to our attention, specifically, look, my kiddo is doing this, he's not acting like himself. Or sometimes it's kind of indirect. In pediatrics, mental health issues, things like anxiety and loneliness, sometimes manifest by headaches or belly aches or symptoms like dizziness. So sometimes it's more of a physical symptom that drives the visit or the phone call, or the parents are contacting us via the portal, and they'll say, my child is having just for instance, let's say headaches 6 or 7 times a week. And as you dig into this, and there's more of an evaluation, of course, but sometimes it's turning out that it's the struggles they're having in school and with friends, or sometimes, related to their parent situation. Kids know when their parents are feeling stressed, and maybe parents themselves or grandparents have been ill or out of work or having financial troubles. All of that kind of trickles down. We sometimes try to fool ourselves thinking that we can protect our kids from family struggles. We don't tell them that for instance, mom lost her job or something like that. But, the kids, they know it. They figure out what's going on. They might not get all the details, but they can tell that their parents are in trouble or their family life is different, and they feel that stress, they absorb that stress, and it comes out in different ways.
This is interesting, because there was a panel that was convened, which it was held by a number of children's mental health experts, talking about stress, and in U.S. News and World Reports there was an interesting article that said children's mental health crisis could be the next wave in the pandemic, and what they were alluding to is what's been termed adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And what happens is that children who are stressed release more stress hormones, and that may set the stage for various health conditions that could exist in these individuals for the rest of their lives, and not just mental health issues, but physical issues like cardiovascular issues or other issues that the stress hormones trigger. And so I think that this is something that's really underappreciated by many doctors who are not tuned into the mental health issues in children.
This is another very, very big issue. Research into the long-term effect of these adverse childhood experiences. It actually began, I think it's interesting, from the adult literature, actually, from studies that were looking at adults who were struggling with obesity specifically. That was how it actually started, which is a huge problem, right? A big problem for adults, and a big drain on the public health system as well. So many morbidities are related to obesity. And researchers were looking, trying to predict what people end up struggling with obesity, and is there a way to prevent it? And this was researched decades ago, actually, that going backwards, they found a very high proportion that these adults had adverse childhood experiences years ago, decades previously, and it seemed to predict continued struggles with obesity. Actually, research since then has linked the same adverse childhood experiences, not just to obesity, though, but to mental health disorders, depression, anxiety, but also to physical disorders, as you said, things like the increased risk of heart attacks and hypertension, diabetes, almost any chronic illness you look at that affects adults can be traced, at least to some degree, as having a contribution to these adverse childhood experiences. Now, COVID itself, of course, is new, and there isn't any long-term data now looking at kids who lived through the era of COVID, but the same sorts of experiences that have been linked to long-term poor health in adults are the same kinds of things that are going on now in the era of COVID, and it's going to take a long time to sort it out, but I fear that there is going to be something here, that this year or year and a half or however long it turns out to be of disruption and closing schools and the many other things that have changed kids' lives will have some very, very long-term effects on their health.
So that's very interesting point, Roy, because closing schools, something that the experts now agree should not have been done, but yet is still going on in many parts of the country, going into the second year. This is, I think, a misguided policy, most would believe, and the repercussions, what these so-called do-gooders are going to cause in terms of the effects on these children and society as a whole. You know, we talk about the effects on each individual, but the cumulative effects on our society, on our healthcare system, are almost immeasurable, wouldn't you say?
Well, I don't want to paint this as an overly black and white issue. I think there's still research to be done, and I'm going to disagree with you a little bit.
Okay.